The glossy real estate brochure landed on the kitchen counter with a thud, like a gauntlet being thrown down. My mother-in-law Gloria stood before me, her face flushed with self-satisfaction. "We've found the perfect place," she announced, gesturing broadly at the photos of an ostentatious McMansion. "Max and I put in an offer this morning." My heart plummeted. "We?" I echoed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, we?" Gloria fixed me with a withering stare. "Well, certainly not you, dear. This is for Max and myself, a fresh start, just the two of us." The implication hung in the air like a bitter fog. She was attempting to take my husband, her son, and leave me behind without any discussion. The audacity of it robbed me of breath. "You can't be serious," I sputtered at last. "That's my husband you're talking about, not some possession." "Don't be dramatic," Gloria scoffed, waving her bejeweled hand dismissively. "It's time Max detached from your apron strings and got his priorities straight. This little boutique fantasy of yours has gone on quite long enough." White-hot anger blazed through me. My boutique was more than a fantasy. It was my life's work, the business I'd built from nothing over 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears. But to Gloria, it would never be worth acknowledging, let alone respecting. The front door opened and Max trudged in, looking contrite. "I'm home," he mumbled, pointedly avoiding my gaze. He knew what hellstorm was brewing. "Well?" Gloria rounded on him imperiously. "Don't just stand there gawping. Tell your wife the good news." Max's shoulders slumped further. "Mom has decided, that is, we've decided to move, to get a place, just her and me." The words lanced through me like rapier blows. There was no weave about it. This was Gloria's edict, period. But the fact that Max was capitulating, putting his mother's wants first, as usual, ignited a cold fury within me. "You're actually going along with this?" I asked him, my voice trembling despite myself. "Moving out, leaving me behind, without even consulting me?" Max opened his mouth, then closed it again, shrinking beneath his mother's domineering glower. The message was clear. She had issued her decree, and in her eyes, that was the end of discussion. But not for me, not this time. A lifetime of resentments, of being belittled and sidelined by this woman, detonated in that instant. I was more than the dowdy wife and mother Gloria derided. I was a successful entrepreneur, a calculated risk-taker who had achieved what she could never comprehend, and I would be damned before letting her disrespect and manipulate me any longer. "You know what?" I heard myself saying in a voice as steely as I'd ever mustered. "If that's how you both want to play it, be my guest." Squaring my shoulders, I met Gloria's gaze with undisguised defiance. "But I guarantee you'll regret it, because I'm through being treated like a second-class person in my own life and marriage. This is your idea of a fresh start? Well, buckle up, because you've got another thing coming." Later that evening, I called an emergency meeting with Max in the living room. He slouched on the couch, hunched and hangdog as usual when facing even the mildest confrontation. "We need to talk," I stated flatly. "This situation with your mother has gone too far." Max shifted uncomfortably. "Lila, please, you know how she gets. She'll move on to the next idea soon enough if we just go along with it for now." "Go along with it?" I arched an eyebrow incredulously. "You're talking about uprooting our entire life on her whim." "It's not a whim to her," he muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. "You know how important family is. She thinks we've gotten too independent." My jaw tightened at the implication. Independent, as if being a self-made entrepreneur was some sort of moral failing. As if not kowtowing to Gloria's every antiquated demand was unforgivable insolence. "Well, I've got news for her and you," I said, keeping my voice forcibly calm. "I didn't claw my way up from nothing, build this business with my bare hands, just to let her take it all away on some entitled power trip." "Lila," Max began, but I cut him off with an upraised hand. "No, let me finish. I put up with your mother's manipulations, her needling insults, and her utter disrespect for way too long. I deferred to her wisdom, and I nearly lost myself in the process." Max opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it and clamped it shut again. Good, I was on a roll now. "You want to know what your precious mother thinks of me, really? That I'm some empty-headed trophy wife living off your income, instead of a millionaire entrepreneur who out-earns you 10 times over?" His eyes widened slightly at that. Of course, Gloria had conveniently left out those details from her skewed version of reality. She thinks I'm a shrew, an ungrateful daughter-in-law who dare demand a modicum of respect and independence. Well, no more. I'm putting my foot down, Max. This toxic family dynamic ends now. For a long moment, Max was silent and still, absorbing my tirade. When he spoke at last, his voice was subdued. So what are you saying, Lila? You want to separate? The penny finally dropped. Max realized the stakes I was playing for, and he was aghast. In his privileged mind, divorce was simply not an option a wife got to exercise, no matter how unhappy. If that's what it takes, I said with quiet finality. If you and your mother are determined to cut me out anyway, at least do me the courtesy of being honest. Do you want to stay in this marriage on equal terms or not? I could see the war playing out behind Max's eyes, the decades of ingrained subservience to Gloria's ideology battling against the faint spark of individuality and self-respect I'd tried kindling in him. I watched that flicker of hope die as he dropped his gaze in resignation. Don't do anything rash, he mumbled at last, ever the beaten dog. Give it some time. We can talk it through. We're way past that point, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. If you can't stand up for our marriage, hell for me, then it's already over anyway. Snatching up my purse, I turned and stormed out of the living room, out of the house. Never mind that it was my house, my business that had bought and paid for it. In that moment, I felt like an utter stranger being rejected and disrespected by those who were supposed to love me most. This was it, I thought as I gunned the engine of my car and peeled out. No more looking back, no more compromises or half measures. If they wouldn't respect me as an equal, I'd just have to demand it through devastating actions. Let the war begin, because I was done playing nice. The next morning, I strode into my boutique's back office and shut the door, needing to gather my thoughts. My mind was still reeling from the confrontation with Max the previous night. I knew his spineless capitulation shouldn't have surprised me, and yet it cut deeply all the same. How could he just abandon me to his mother's whims like that? Didn't our 2 decades of marriage, of me supporting him through failed job after failed job, mean anything? The hurt and anger warred within me. Part of me wanted to just slink back home and beg for forgiveness, to revert to keeping the peace at all costs, as I'd done for so long. But I couldn't. I was damn tired of being the bigger person while Gloria relentlessly ground me underfoot. No, if this was the way they wanted to play, then I'd match their disrespect move for move. Let the gloves come off for once. Settling at my desk, I pulled up our financial records and online banking details, the ones Max always deferred to me on. If he wasn't going to communicate honestly, I'd have to educate myself on the full situation. It didn't take long for unsettling patterns to emerge. Funds being siphoned into weird LLCs and trusts I'd never heard of. Charges and withdrawals made behind my back, bearing addresses and company names affiliated with Gloria's real estate holdings. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Gloria had been slowly, steadily bleeding our assets, whittling away our hard-earned nest egg through underhanded chicanery. All while playing the loving, dependent matriarch to Max's blind eye. But of course, she viewed my business success with utter disdain. Of course, she schemed to cut me out, after decades of me funding a household and lifestyle she could never provide her precious son alone. My hard work, my progress, it was all an insult to her antiquated value system. Well, if that's how the game was rigged, I just have to change the rules. No more playing by her twisted sense of decorum, not when Gloria had so flagrantly violated it herself through deception. As I kept digging, unearthing a complex web of financial treachery enough make my blood boil, the doors opened behind me. I spun in my chair to see Max hovering hesitantly in the doorway, his hands shoved in his pockets. An apology already formed on his lips, I could see it. "Lila," he began, ducking his head, the coward's stance, but I cut him off abruptly. "Save it," I said, acid edging my tone. "I know everything, all the stunts your mother's been pulling behind my back with our money, the LLCs, the shady investments, the works." Max froze, eyes widening as realization dawned in them. Gloria clearly hadn't let him in on her little side hustles. I'd blown his ignorance. "You're not half the transparent liar your mother is," I went on. "At least she knows she's deceitful instead of pretending innocence." "Lila, I swear." Max raised placating hands. I had no idea she was doing that stuff. You know I don't pay attention to money details. You always handled. Don't play dumb, I snapped, cutting his excuse short. I'm the one who made the money while you floated from job to job. Hell, you probably knew it all along, just turned a blind eye as usual while Mommy pulled her stunts. Hurt flickered across Max's doughy face. Good, maybe some of this would actually penetrate that mulish skull of his. I want the truth, I demanded, leaning forward. All of it. What your beloved mother's really been up to with my business's revenue stream while you let her manipulate you. Max opened his mouth, but I held up a hand in a peremptory silence. No more lies, no more deference, no more moral superiority from Gloria. You're going to come completely clean once and for all. Or so, help me, this all lands in court and on the front page. Understand? Swallowing hard, Max could only give a mute nod. He knew I wasn't bluffing this time. Finally, perhaps I might get some honesty to fight this battle. Because if Gloria wanted a war over control of this family, she'd better buckle up. I was done playing her victim, and nothing was holding me back any longer. After prying the full, ugly truth from Max about his mother's financial machinations, I knew I needed to play my next moves carefully. Gloria was tenacious, vindictive. She wouldn't go down without an all-out fight, which meant I needed to secure my own support system. No more allowing her to isolate and gaslight me through Max's cowed compliance. If I was going to survive this war intact, I needed allies and assets of my own. My first call was to June, my best friend and co-founder of the boutique. She'd been there since the start, watching me claw my way from a cash-strapped single mom to a successful entrepreneur, while Gloria sneered at every stride of progress. That manipulative witch has gone too far this time, I vented after relaying the basics to June. Using mine and Max's finances as her private slush fund for years? It's unconscionable. Among other things, June said darkly, I never could understand why you let her stomp all over you like that. I sighed heavily. I didn't, not at first, but she just whittled me down over time with the needling and belittling, playing the family martyr at every turn while Max just sat back and watched. You know how insidious that can be. Well, those days are over. June's voice took on a harder edge. No more Mrs. Nice Girl, Lila. If that shriveled bat cow wants a fight for once, I say we give her a war. Hearing my friend's steadfast support buoyed me, banishing the last vestiges of doubt. This was the right path, drawing that line at last. You're right, I said with renewed conviction. It's time I took off the kid gloves and handled this head-on. She wants control so badly. Let's see how she handles having it taken away for once. After filling June in on the rest of my revelations and my plans going forward, I felt re-energized, focused. With her on my side as always, suddenly this battle felt eminently winnable. My next call was to my son Eli, just returned to campus for his junior year of college out of state. As Gloria's manipulations came to light, I knew he'd be invaluable in securing leverage over Max, Gloria's most powerful pawn. Say it isn't so, Eli groaned when I recounted the situation. Grandma Gloria's really gone full-tilt supervillain, huh? I couldn't help but chuckle at his dismayed tone. I'm afraid so, though her obsession with controlling our family unit has gotten truly pathological. Geez, Mom, he said, I always suspected she was poisoning the well where Dad was concerned, but not like this. She's really been siphoning money from you both all this time? Among other things, I replied grimly. So I finally put my foot down and told Max it's over if he can't stand up to her machinations. But you know how helpless he is against her guilt trips. Tell me about it, Eli groaned. I love the big lug, but he's got a spineless streak as wide as the Mississippi when it comes to Grandma. I steeled myself, knowing Eli was about to be caught in the crossfire, but determined to be up front. Which is why I may need your help, son. You know how much Max lives in fear of disappointing his mother. Well, it may come down to choosing her insanity or his own wife and family. Eli was silent for a long moment, taking that in. Then he exhaled heavily. Say no more, Mom. You know I'm in your corner on this, 100%. I've got your back, whatever you need. Relief coursed through me to know I'd have backup containing Max's worst codependent impulses. With my trusted friends and allies solidly in my camp, I felt more reassured taking the fight to Gloria at last. Just let me know the battle plan, Eli said. That woman's out of control. It's time somebody stopped enabling her delusions. I smiled tightly, feeling a simmering mixture of anger, determination, and vindication. Don't worry, baby. One way or another, I'll make sure that message gets through, even if I have to get creatively uncivil to do it. With my key support pillars shored up, my next objective was clear: assessing and securing my financial assets before Gloria could sabotage me further. This time, if the gloves had to come off, I wouldn't be the one pulling punches. With my allies assembled and my assets as secure as I could manage for the moment, it was time to go on the offensive against Gloria. I knew her next move would be trying to turn the court of public opinion against me through her twisted manipulation tactics. Sure enough, within a few days, the whispers and sidelong glances started around town and at the boutique. Gloria was already painting me as the unstable, ungrateful daughter-in-law, cruelly separating her poor, innocent son from his devoted mother. I could just hear the dehumanizing cackle in her voice as she spun her tales. But this time, I was ready. This time, I came prepared to beat her at her own underhanded game for once. It started small at first. A few loyal friends and clientele expressing shock that Gloria could be so cruel and deceptive based on what they knew of our warm family dynamic. Seeds of doubt strategically planted in receptive ears. Then the evidence trickled out, selectively released through trusted sources. Paperwork documenting Gloria's financial treachery. Eyewitness accounts from employees and vendors who'd been browbeaten or lied to over the years to facilitate her cons. With each revelation, I could see the tide beginning to turn. The cotton candy image of a kindly, misunderstood matriarch that Gloria projected so carefully soon dissolved into a more accurate picture of cold-blooded entitlement and ugly deception. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Gloria had spent decades carefully cultivating her faux, genteel Southern woman persona, inspiring defense from staunch holdouts. But I only needed to sway enough friends and members of high society to her true toxic nature. The height of my counter-narrative came when I arranged a spotlight interview with the local lifestyle magazine, the same one that had once featured Gloria in a puff piece extolling her graciousness as a mother-in-law. I sat primly on the interviewer's stylish sectional, clutching a glass of lemon water as the photographer captured image after image. It was almost comical how they strove to create an aura of serenity and feminine vulnerability around me. If only they knew just how ice-cold and dead set on vengeance I'd become. So, Lila, the interviewer began carefully once we started recording. In your own words, what prompted this separation from your husband Max and mother-in-law? I drew a measured breath, letting my face slacken into an expression of consternation and sorrow. If I'm being fully honest, this was a long time coming. Almost from the moment I married in, there was tension between Gloria and myself. I dropped my gaze demurely as the recorder furiously scribbled notes. She never felt I was worthy of her son, worthy of carrying on the family legacy she held so dear. And heaven forbid I attempt to carve my own path. Leaning forward, I went for the emotional jugular. Even as my business took off, and I became more financially successful than we could ever dream, she constantly derided and marginalized my role. She just couldn't stand to see a working woman assert herself outside of her predetermined notions of how a wife and mother should behave. The interviewer's eyes widened, and I could sense the thrill of the sordid family drama playing out before him. These were the tantalizing taboo details the audience would eat up. It culminated with her attempt to quite literally steal my husband away, abandoning me alone so she could re-establish her total control over poor Max's life, I said, letting my voice tremble with barely restrained emotion. All to punish me, I think, for daring to step out of what she decreed were acceptable boundaries for her daughter-in-law. I shifted my gaze, letting my eyes grow overbright with the shimmer of unshed tears. My husband has been so cowed and conditioned by his mother's manipulation, he couldn't even see how cruel and divisive her plan was. She used him as a blunt instrument to try and destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. My business, my sense of self-worth, my life. Letting my chin drop, I blinked hard to emphasize the facsimile of grief overcoming me. I couldn't allow it anymore, as ttp:/anymore.as/painful as this separation is. I had to make a stand once and for all, for my own sanity and self-respect. I trailed off, letting the heavy silence amplify the impact of my melodramatic performance. When I chanced to glimpse up, the interviewer's expression was one of rapt absorption, hook, line, and sinker. Without uttering a single concrete provable allegation, I had recast the entire narrative around the long-suffering virtuous daughter-in-law pushed to the brink by her monstrous controller mother-in-law. Just what Gloria deserved after subjecting me to a lifetime of that very treatment. And this was just Act 1. If she thought this opening salvo of perception shaping was brutal, she was in for a world of hurt. Because I didn't take on the role of vindictive warrior lightly. But now that the gloves were off, I was determined to crush her mercilessly. With the opening public relations salvo fired, attention turned to the impending legal battleground. No shock, Gloria came out swinging like a junkyard dog, hiring a soulless bulldog of a lawyer to protect her interests at all costs. The day I strode into the first hearing for our divorce proceedings, I could feel the white-hot hatred radiating off Gloria in waves. She sat rigid and coiffed at the defendant's table, dry-eyed but with a vein pulsing viciously at her taut jawline. Max slouched beside her, somehow managing to make a tailored suit look worn and defeated. His eyes were downcast, any hint of the meek apology I'd once glimpsed there now extinguished. As I took my seat opposite them, our eyes met for the briefest moment. His gaze skittered away almost instantly, while Gloria's burned into me with seething menace. The gauntlet was well and truly thrown. Mercifully, the judge ran a by-the-books hearing, all brisk professionalism as he laid out the procedures and discovery phases to come. The cagey dance of obscuring assets and parsed legalese lay ahead, with both sides surely determined to spare no rhetorical knife thrust. But I'd hired a killer legal team as well, ready to match and capture every underhanded feint. With trembling hands, I signed the dense divorce petition, making this schism officially real and irreversible at last. Outside the courtroom afterwards, the jarring sound of clapping heels on marble preceded Gloria sweeping towards me, Max in sullen tow. The Arctic disdain seemed to bleed from her very pores. "You utterly shameless harlot," she spat without preamble, nostrils flaring. "Did you really think it would be that simple? That a few lies and distortions would let you slither out of this unscathed?" I arched an eyebrow coolly. "I don't know what reality you're operating in, Gloria, but there's nothing simple or unscathed happening here." Her eyes bugged with rage that I would dare remain composed. "You've turned my own son against me. I hope you're proud of yourself for tearing this family apart with your bitterness and hysteria." "Hysteria? Please." I shot Max a look of patent disgust. "Your son made his choice under your control a long time ago. You cashed that reality check yourself the second you decided to cut me out for daring to think for myself." Gloria opened her mouth, undoubtedly to unleash another blistering assault, but a firm hand on her shoulder gave her pause, her bulldog lawyer wearing a slick and impassive look of caution. "I wouldn't say anything else just now, Mrs. Jennings," he murmured in a mild tone that nevertheless brooked no argument. "We need to be circumspect about eroding our position from here." "My position was eroded the second she dragged us into this ludicrous public spectacle," Gloria hissed, rounding furiously on the hapless attorney. For the first time in memory, Max's dull gaze lifted slightly, as if even he could sense his mother's overconfident instability giving tactical ground. She was showing her true deranged stripes in front of an audience for once instead of scripting the narrative. "We'll pursue the appropriate legal channels to rectify this injustice," the lawyer stated, voice devoid of all inflection. "My client's rights and assets will be vigorously defended." "Damn right they will," Gloria fumed. Whirling back towards me, she leveled an accusatory talon finger that stopped just shy of jabbing my chest. "You deceitful little whore," she seethed in a harsh whisper. "Did you really think it would be that simple? Peddling lies and spinning fairy tales to try and steal from this family?" I stared back at her blandly, refusing to let her venom rattle me. "I'm not the thief here, Gloria. Just remember that when the full truth comes to light, and sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say." Her mouth twisted in an ugly moue. "Oh, this war is only just beginning. You have no idea the tangled legal hell I'll unleash on you for this betrayal." Gloria's icy stare bored into me for a long, fraught beat, but if she expected me to quail beneath her vaunted Medusa glower, she had another thing coming. The scared, inferior girl she'd bullied for decades was gone, scourged away at last by this righteous defiance. I simply raised my chin in mute challenge. "Bring it on." Gloria flinched, almost imperceptibly. For perhaps the first time, she recognized the implacable threat I now posed her dominance, and fear flickered in the depth of her beady eyes. Good. Maybe she was finally realizing the chasm she was staring into on this path of reaping exactly what she'd spent decades sowing, underestimating me until it was too late. As Gloria whirled to stalk away, spitting furious vitriol with Max trailing helplessly in her wake, I knew the hard work lay ahead. But as daunting as it appeared, I refused to be cowed, or to back down from delivering the same disrespect and brutalization I had endured for far too long. This was a reckoning born of survival instincts, and if Gloria honestly believed I would pull any punches just to preserve her twisted definition of decorum, she was about to learn otherwise in the most painful way imaginable. After that explosive first courtroom encounter, Gloria clearly sensed she was losing her domineering grip on the situation. Her scorched earth legal tactics grew increasingly unhinged and desperate as the divorce proceedings ground on. Baseless allegations of criminal conduct were flung my way, along with subpoenas for every scrap of financial documentation, no matter how tangential. Her thug of a lawyer deployed delaying stall after delaying stall, hoping to bury me in mounting legal fees and punitive filings. Through it all, I simply gritted my teeth and let my own pit bull attorneys match each bombastic feint with calculated, strategic counterpunches. Brick by tedious brick, the facade of Gloria's unimpeachable noble widow virtue crumbled away. Underneath, her true nature was revealed. A vindictive, narcissistic tyrant hell-bent on total control at all costs. The turning point finally came about 4 months into the divorce slog. One morning, I sat across from my lead attorney, feeling haggard but grimly satisfied as he flipped through a dense stack of documents with arched brows. "This is quite the damning find, Mrs. Jennings," he said at last in a measured tone. "I must congratulate your forensic auditors." He pushed the relevant pages across the desk. I scanned them with greedy eyes, my own mouth twisting into a savage smile as the implications sank in. "You're sure about the sourcing? About tying all these accounts and holdings directly to Gloria?" My lawyer gave a curt nod. "Ironclad. There's no dancing around what this reveals. Your mother-in-law has systematically been sheltering and shifting assets for years in blatant violation of disclosure laws." I sat back, letting the delicious vindication of this checkmate moment wash over me. "Let me guess. Shady LLCs and trusts held under dummy corporations, all transferring funds back and forth in a dizzying money go-round." "Precisely," he said with a thin smile of professional approval. "She set up an entire covert network determined to bleed your marital assets dry behind your back, and skilled as she was at covering her tracks until we found the right loose thread to start pulling. There's more than enough here to pursue criminal charges if you so wish." I steepled my fingers, feeling a heady sense of power buoyed by righteousness and vengeance. After a lifetime of being subjugated to Gloria's abuse, I now held the lever to dismantle her from the inside out. "Oh, I do wish," I purred. "But first things first, I want to dangle this over her head publicly and see just how far she'll go to keep her facade of nobility intact." And so we leaked a strategically innocuous notice through the court database. New evidence of financial misdeeds presenting a significant shift in the case status. No details, just enough to seed whispers and set Gloria into a tailspin wondering how much we'd uncovered. Her reaction at the next hearing was as visceral as I could have hoped. The moment she sailed into the courtroom, those dead, beady toad's eyes instantly found mine across the divide. I met her glare with an idle smile, feigning an innocence she surely saw through as a taunt. Gloria didn't disappoint, her face contorting into a grand, malleable mask of outrage as she turned towards the judge's bench. "What is the meaning of this, Your Honor?" she squawked without preamble, jabbing a bony finger towards my smirking legal team. "These unsubstantiated allegations are unethical intimidation tactics aimed at depriving my son of his lawful assets and inheritance." The judge blinked owlishly before gesturing for order. "I'm unaware of the exact nature of any new allegations at this point, Mrs. Jennings. Perhaps if you were to—" "I'll tell you the nature of them," she seethed, drowning out his attempt to speak as spittle frothed at the corners of her mouth. "They're shameless lies, perpetuated by that scheming harpy and her brood of money-grubbing enablers." Beside her, Max sat sunken and still as granite, not even attempting to calm his mother's hysteria. The dynamic was sickeningly clear. She called the unhinged shots, and he meekly watched it all burn around him. "We have evidence, incontrovertible evidence, of your financial treachery and obfuscation," my lawyer stated in a flat tone, standing now to match Gloria's frantic intensity. "And we have no compunction about pursuing all available legal remedies on behalf of our client." Gloria looked ready to burst, her face purpling with apoplexy. Clearly she'd been banking on our case unraveling under the weight of her stall tactics and obstructionism. The notion that I might emerge from the affair not just unscathed, but actually triumphant, never computed. I took my cue, slowly rising to my feet and letting my gaze bore into the stunned silence. Meeting Gloria's incandescent stare with Arctic resolve, I let the hammer drop in a low, even cadence. "It's over, Gloria. We can do this the easy way with full transparency, or we can pursue the maximum criminal charges your systematized fraud clearly warrants." Her mouth worked spasmodically, chest heaving with rasps of rage, too intense to be given voice. I knew she was staring into the abyss of powerlessness, the ultimate defeat for a control freak like her to fathom. Letting my feet harden further, I twisted the knife one final turn. "Either way, the lies end now. Your reign of terror is done." A strangled cry of incoherent fury escaped Gloria's throat, then her legs crumpled underneath her, sending her collapsing in an undignified heap to the polished floor. I watched her pitifully writhe there, devoid of empathy or mercy. After the emotional and psychological torture she'd put me through for 2 decades, she deserved worse than this overdue humiliation. As officers moved to assist the raging harridan to her feet, I settled back in my seat. Exhaustion washed over me, but a bone-deep satisfaction laced it. I had finally broken Gloria's stranglehold. The hard-won battle was nearly over. Now, to go in for the kill. The weeks following Gloria's courtroom meltdown were a whirlwind of proceedings, testimonies, and legal wrangling as the dominoes continued toppling. Turns out the tangled financial web of fraud my forensic team untangled was just the ugly tip of the iceberg. With each new exploit and bank account uncovered, the true staggering scope of Gloria's long con over our marital assets compounded. Looted retirement funds, falsified tax trails and money laundering, even evidence suggesting she'd had Max co-sign on shadowy real estate deals unawares, putting him at potential criminal jeopardy. Her thirst for control, for bleeding us dry to amass her private queendom, knew no bounds. And Max, her domesticated sap of a son, had been an unwitting tool in enabling it all along through his blind deference. I'm not proud to admit the savage gratification I felt watching her once marbled facade of gracious dignity crumble to sordid ruin. With each salacious new revelation dragged into the harsh light, Gloria transformed more and more into the monster I'd always sensed lurking beneath her saccharine propriety. And God, did she fight like a cornered rat. Her new legal team, fresh blood after I dismantled her first contemptible lapdog, came hard with Baroque counterfilings and subpoenas. Vexatious litigation gumming up the dockets, hoping to drag the battle into an endless slog. Through it all, I simply gritted my teeth and rode out the contortions with grim stoicism. Thanks to our forensic case being airtight, I knew it was ultimately all delaying the inevitable for poor, self-destructive Gloria. Still, her efforts to depict me as some black-hearted succubus set on tearing her family apart through lies and treachery did bore some toxic fruit. A particular nasty screed in the local society pages questioned how I could so coldly alienate and emasculate my dedicated husband for the sake of selfish greed. I took minor solace in the fact that Max had at last been jolted from his decadent Stockholm Syndrome trance. Maybe seeing the full repugnance of his mother's misdeeds laid bare had awakened some long-dormant vestige of self-preservation. Whatever the cause, he no longer rotated along dumbly in her orbit during the proceedings, instead sitting in blank, dejected silence. Gloria railed at his betrayal, of course, demanding fealty that was never to come. In those rare moments, watching the dynamic of her thirst for domination finally cripple her most steadfast enabler, it almost inspired perverse pity in me. Almost. I quickly strangled that impulse whenever it reared its ugly head. She deserved no mercy, no soft landing from the karmic consequences of her greed and abuse, not after the decades of gaslighting and dehumanizing she'd inflicted. Only this time I was the immovable object, and her antiquated beliefs about total matriarchal control were the unstoppable force. Something had to finally give after all these years, and when the end inevitably came, it was with the thunder of an avalanche. In a dizzying span of days, the judge's rulings piled up in a cascade that left Gloria and her wanton pillaging of my nest egg in smoldering ruin, punitive financial penalties stripping away her illicit gains, assets frozen and forfeited. Even a shockingly stiff watch-release bond slapped on her while the criminal probes into tax evasion and racketeering played out. I'll never forget the look of wide-eyed horror on Gloria's face as the judgments rained down, binding her in the chains of accountability after a lifetime evading consequences. The quaking realization that the nuclear detonation she'd always threatened others with had finally blown up in her face. And as the bailiff slapped on the restraints and led her away like the common criminal she was beneath all that high-born posturing, I almost felt a pang of satisfaction, vindication. No, it went deeper than that, down to that primal vein of self-preservation Gloria had awoken in me so brutally. As I watched her hauled off in shame and utter defeat, I realized it was nothing less than the sweet rictus grin of karmic justice serving itself at last. When the dust finally settled, with Max's sizable share of the assets allocated back into my control, the temporary chaos gave way to a shocking sense of order and newborn clarity. The nightmare was finally over. I had survived the gauntlet that had nearly destroyed me, and emerged victorious on the other side, free from the hideous albatross that was my mother-in-law's demented shadow. As I sat in the pristine, newly refreshed living room, I marveled at the sensation of utter psychic renewal. Like a lingering malignancy had been excised, letting fresh air and light pour in to clean and heal after decades of toxic festering. I could breathe again, could live again, liberated from the crushing weights of abuse and coercion that had nearly robbed me of my very identity and self-worth. It was time to get back to what truly mattered. My business, my treasured independence, and building the life I knew I deserved, but had almost let slip away forever in the void of someone else's poisoned power games. Like any hard-fought journey, I was scarred from the battle. But beneath those hardened grooves and calloused armor, the core of the woman I was always meant to be stood renewed and emboldened. My future was unshackled and awaiting, bursting with potential I'd nearly let go forever. As I rose and crossed the room to gaze out upon my newly reclaimed world, I felt something finally click into place after so many eroded years of self-denial and subjugation. I was free at last from Gloria's tyranny over my life and soul. And with that freedom came the resolve to seize my destiny on my own terms, to crush anyone who tried to divert or deny it ever again. This time was just the beginning. Gloria's defeat was only the spark heralding the fiery rebirth yet to come. My war was won. Now my life's true journey could at last begin.